All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the latest Urban Living Unlocked webinar. Today, we are going to be discussing the future of build to rent. My name is George Sell. I'm editor of Urban Living News, and we are a B2B platform for the living and flex workspace sectors. Today's webinar is going to be an hour long. We're going to have around 45 or 50 minutes of conversation with our fantastic panel. We'd like to make it as interactive as possible, so please do submit your questions using either the chat or the Q&A function in Zoom. We'll either answer them there or then, or we'll save a bit of time at the end of the session. Everyone who is registered for the webinar will be sent a link of the recording of it via email. And then when we get to the end of the session, we're going to just put up a quick survey, and we'd really appreciate your feedback so we know how to make this webinar series better and how to shape the content to suit people in the industry. So before we meet our panelists, I just wanted to show a couple of slides of context to give you an idea of some of the things we're going to be discussing today. Um, I'm going to try and stay positive, but there are a lot of headwinds facing build to rent at the moment. We have got a potential supply drop off imminent in the multifamily area, particularly. A lot of that is to do with the Great Gateway 2 issue, which you can see on the left there. The Renters' Rights Bill is going to complicate things. I'm not necessarily sure it's going to prevent supply coming through, but it makes operations more complicated. And if we move on to the next slide, slightly more positive. There's quite a lot of investment activity still going on in the industry. On the left there, there's a potential serious sale in the offing, a 500 million sale in London. The middle one's quite interesting. It's Invesco buying some apartments from a house builder rather than single family rental units. So that's an interesting twist on things that are going on. And then on the right there, you've got a more traditional house builder transaction, some family homes that have been snapped up recently by Lloyd's Living. And I think we have one more slide here. Yep, some other things going on. Despite the challenges, there are still new white label operators, third party operators coming into the market. There have been two or three in the last year, I think. And as we're just coming back off the budget, I put that slide up there on the left. It's pretty clear that a lot of people in government don't really get build to rent, and they don't appreciate its opportunity to help meet the incredibly ambitious housing target that this government has got. There was no specific allusion to build to rent in the budget, which was discussed, disappointing. And we'll move on and talk about that in a minute. So let's go on and meet our panel. We have got a fantastic team with us here today, loads of experience, loads of knowledge. So I'll ask them to introduce themselves quickly from left to right as we see them on the screen. So first of all, Sarah, good morning to you.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Sarah Birchley. I'm an executive director and general counsel at Quintain.
Do you want to tell us very
Yeah.
quickly what Quintain does?
So Quintain, we are developers and operators of build to rent. We're responsible for the regeneration of Wembley Park more recently and continuing, I will add. Our build to rent brand you may have heard of is Quintain Living, and we've got about 7,000 residents up at Wembley.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. Michael, welcome to you. You're on mute, Michael.
To be. Someone had to do that right at the start.
Yeah,
After
let's get it
4
out of the way.
years, you'd expect me to have got it right. So Mike Keaveney, Director of Land and Development at Grainger. Grainger are solely a build-to-rent developer, investor, operator with 11,000 homes across England and Wales. And we have developed around 30 schemes across the country since 2015, when Helen Gordon came in and pivoted the business to be solely built-to-rent.
Thank you, Mike. Paul, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks for inviting me on the show. So CEO, now sort of non-exec chairman of Hilltop Capital Partners. We are a core credit business and that lends money to SME developers. We started about 5-6 years ago with a couple institutional partners, and we've now shifted to build a new platform with Michelle Hancock, former Grainger, or former Greystar. She was actually at Grainger as well. Based on our sort of development background and expertise. So I was a developer for many years across Central and Eastern Europe, across 7 different countries, building shopping centers, residential homes, and hotels. So we're a bit of a garage band startup. Our brand is Better Living. That's Hilltop Property Partners. And I guess that's why I'm on the show. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Paul. And finally, Scott, good morning to you.
Morning, George. I'm Scott Berry. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for Apache Capital. We're an investment manager in the living sector within the UK, mainly focusing at the moment on multifamily and single family. We cover everything from development through to operations, and recently launched our operational brand Present Made last year with the first scheme in Quintain in Cambridge, and currently have about 4,500 units under management. So looking forward to today. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. If you look in the chat, you will see the LinkedIn profiles of all our panelists. So if you want to make contact with them and carry on the conversation afterwards, then please do so. Okay, as we've had the budget this week, I think it would be remiss not to talk about it quickly. I don't want to dwell on it too much. There's been a lot written and a lot said about it already. But just briefly, if I could ask you each in turn, your kind of top line impressions of the budget and how you think it will affect the build to rent sector. Sarah, would you like to go first on that one?
Very good morning. I think from I suppose from an overall perspective, I don't think there are any sort of huge surprises in there because so much of it was leaked beforehand. I think impact on the build to rent sector, it's hard to see what the sort of direct impact would be. So I think it's probably going to be from more on the personal level and personal taxes that will affect affordability for our residents.
Yeah. Okay. Mike?
Yeah, I'd agree. It's pretty neutral on the face of it for build to rent. We were hoping for some multi-dwelling relief and various other things we lobbied for. We didn't get anything specific. I would like to say just so indirectly though, all we care about, we'll probably talk about this later on the panel, is what happens to bond yields. And we need bond yields to come down, and that's all about confidence of the markets in the government. So it's really about how the bond markets react to these budgets that matters right now for us.
Mike, what did you think of the inclusion of yet another tax increase for private landlords, buy to let people kind of.
Yeah. I'm really so I think it's overall a real problem. We know that there's a massive loss of mom and pop landlords, let's call them, from the sector, which and institutional build to rent and other parties, other PRS are not filling the gap. So all we're doing really is shrinking the market in a time of massive undersupply. Which puts pressure on rents and just generally. And of course, if you sell your property, if you're a mum and pop landlord, you sell your property, you sell it vacant possession. So you're making someone homeless in order to sell it, right? So I was pretty downhearted to see that yet again. And there's a view amongst the mum and pop landlords that the government is focused on bringing in institutional capital to take it over. But the reality is, none of us play in that pool. We do not want to be buying 2 up, 2 downs in a terrace in Bradford and then something over. We need assets which are grouped locally and that we can properly manage. So there is no institutional capital going to come in and take its place, in my view. What we do, much like Quintain and others, are big urban or suburban schemes collectively, and the mum and pop landlord is not in danger from us. So it's just a loss of supply. That's what it causes, is my worry. And I'm you'll see on LinkedIn, the housing crisis has got to be addressed. and that's not addressing it.
Yeah, yeah. It's the renters who suffer at the end of the day. Paul, what were your impressions of the budget?
Well, pretty much the same. I would have to just reiterate what Michael said. I think the higher taxes on passive income, whether it be dividends or rental income, is going to do a couple things. But I mean, reducing the supply of rental stock from the PRS, from the private rental sector, is a disaster, because you've got 1.2 million people or more. I don't know what the number is exactly, that earn between sort of 30 to 45,000 pounds a year in annual salaries. And that's, where do those people go? And they're getting pushed to that, what we call the squeezed middle. And there's really no stock being built for that. The other thing is, reducing income or increasing those taxes just pushes individual people, to sort of riskier assets. And I think that's a bad thing. So I think lots of economic uncertainty, PRS sector getting kind of decimated. And then, of course, that uncertainty leads to lack of confidence and people kind of sitting on their hands. But so I wasn't surprised, as Sarah said. It was all pretty much publicized earlier. But I think the point that Michael made is extremely valid, because you're just reducing stock in a growing market.
Yeah, yeah. And finally, Scott, your thoughts on the budget, please.
Thanks, George. After everything anyone said, I'm not too sure there's much to add. I mean, just echoing what Paul and Michael have said, and what Sarah. I mean, the clearly, and I think it was one of the slides that you showed earlier in the introduction, sort of the political misunderstanding what BTR is and what it can do to the housing crisis in this country is scary to think about. There's so many opportunities for people to actually help, and the government just doesn't understand what that is. And then the action in the budget in terms of what they've done for private landlords just amplifies the problem. It doesn't solve it. So it's just interesting that there was sort of very little consultation, very little. That was probably the only thing in the budget that wasn't actually sort of put out for people to comment on before. Everything else was, and it was taken away. So a bit scary sometimes, but we just need to go forward.
Mm. I don't think the trumpeting of 350 extra planners when there are 561 local authorities in the UK has really got anyone too excited either, albeit it's a step in the right direction, but not sure it's going to have too much effect. Interestingly, Brookfield did buy an HMO portfolio recently. Obviously, it was a student-based one, and it was focused around sort of core university locations. But I do think there will be some institutional money coming into HMOs, but it's got to be the right product, and there's a lot of unsuitable product out there which they won't be looking at. But I think that will be interesting to see next year. Paul, did you want to pick up on that topic?
Well, I mean, yeah, great strategy, but really hard to execute, because who are buying and building those HMO platforms? They're small operators, and I spoke to one last week down in Cambridge, and it's a great business model, but it's very granular, and you need capital to build a platform that's big enough for somebody like Brookfield to buy. So the problem is actually, where does that delivery? I mean, it may be a great strategy in an asset class, but it's a little bit like multifamily. Everybody wants it, talks about it. Obviously there are people in it that are on this panel, but it's not easy to build those platforms, as you well know. So it's the delivery of the product that I think is the real problem. How do you fund the platforms, basically?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Well, let's have a broader look then at investor sentiment around build to rent. Scott, maybe if I could start with you, what are investors looking for in build to rent at the moment? Are they seeing great opportunity in forward funding, or are they looking to buy stabilized assets because they don't want to take on development risk in the current climate? Give us a kind of picture of the scene at the moment.
Yeah, I think the forward funding market is really drying up. I think anyone getting involved in that either has quite a significant amount of capital behind them, but also a large time frame in terms of when it can actually be deployed. But I think the stabilized assets, there's only so much that's sort of coming out of the Gen 1 sort of Quintain have sold a few of that. But there's this disparity between what people are willing to buy at and what people are willing to sell it at the moment. And that gap is too wide to negotiate in a lot of terms. And everyone who's sort of started in the build to rent in the beginning of the process is really past their business plans now. But don't want to give up what they have, don't want to give up the value that is there, and looking to go through. But the gateway, if the government can look at the gateway and get that into place, and it brings that cycle and stop, and that the graph of sort of the supply coming in sort of 28 and 29, and that cliff edge that we're facing at the moment, is only going to amplify the problem. So you've almost got to fix 2 or 3 small core problems to get the investment cycle moving forward. But I think for investors, they just want some sort of stability in terms of what's going to happen in the sector. We've had the Renters Reform Act, Scottish rent reforms are changing again. But there just almost needs a sort of a 3 to 4 year sort of plan about what's going to happen to the sector that people can actually have confidence in.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Scott. Mike, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so the reality is today that in most places you can buy a good stabilized asset cheaper than you could develop it. That's the reality. That is a short-term thing. That's not the long-term, medium-term view. Viability for build to rent will come back, and we're hopeful that for our schemes with discount market rent, we'll be able to be helped with grant to get them more viable. It always comes down to, when you say what do investors want, they want a return for their risk. It's as simple as that, and it's got to make sense. And right now they are, they're probably sitting back a bit because they're not sure about where yields are going. But then you're into a pretty difficult environment with Gateway 2. So as we say, we kind of need less messing around the delivery and what you have to go through and the hurdles, and allow it to settle down. And then we need a little bit of bond yield compression in this country, and then I think it will take off. But for now, all investors, I have this conversation all the time with people in the public sector. Investors are really simple. They want a return for their risk.
Yeah.
And the more uncertain the environment, the higher the return. And so a stable environment means people can go, okay, well, this is stable. We can accept a lower return for our risk because there's less risk. And until that is the case, I think it'll be difficult for the short term. That we're talking, maybe 12 months. I don't know. But I think, yeah. So that would be my overall view. I think, but right now, stabilized assets is a good place to play.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Sarah, let's jump forward a question and talk about the gateway process and how it's affecting delivery at the moment, and how you think it will affect your plans for the next few years. Can you give us a kind of picture of how your activity at Wembley has been affected by this?
Yeah, I mean, it's we've been sort of quite public about how we've been affected by the delays on the gateway side of things. I mean, I think with the BSA and this whole process, it's never been the content or the principle that's been the issue. It's been the delivery and the process, which has been quite frustrating. And sort of speaking to something that Scott was talking about earlier, it's really hard to stack together viability for investors when you've got already when you're factoring in new development. The industry is used to talking about timing and potential delays, and being quite au fait with how to work that into your model. But then now we have the additional uncertainty of the gateway process. So you've kind of got that extra layer of uncertainty that sort of makes things a lot harder to I suppose to model for investment. But I think one other thing I would say on the BSA is, as much as we've had the sort of lack of resource to be able to get sort of a clear way through on the gateway side of things, there's also the sort of building safety case application side, which hasn't been publicised as much as the gateways. It hasn't been in the press or reported on as much, but through that process as well, we're experiencing resource issues and huge, wild inconsistencies. So there's a lot of work to be done there. I mean, it will come around. We will get to a stage where we know what we're being asked for, but we're certainly not there yet.
So, in summary, there are significant delays to your plans for the next phases of Wembley. The demand for the homes is there, but you're
Yeah.
not able to deliver them as quickly as you would like.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's just that extra layer of complete uncertainty at the end of the project, which is so expensive, that is really, yeah, not helping. I mean, there are other factors, but that's definitely not helping.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. Mike, did you want to come in on that? You've done it again, Mike. You're on mute, Mike. There you go. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, sorry about that. Having a problem with my iPad. Yeah, two points. A lot of people talk about Gateway 2. Gateway 2 is masking something else, which is viability behind it. Okay, so the reality is lots of schemes will come through Gateway 2 and then realise actually they still can't start. And for build to rent, fortunately doesn't have the next problem, which is which the house builders have, which is that, right, we've got Gateway 2, we're viable on paper, but actually we're not sure the demand's there to deliver enough sales to get us going. So it's a multi-layered thing. Just on Gateway 2, the building safety regulator is going through a massive learning curve, which they should have done a long time ago. But I'm really pleased with what I'm seeing in terms of the recognition of the complexity of what's happening. I think Andy Rowe's generally doing a really good job. I think some of the mood music coming out of him around taking what people don't talk about is things like Reg 12, which is where you want to do adjustments to an existing building, which is causing huge delays. So there's a lot of pragmatism happening at the moment, which I'm really pleased to see. I wish we hadn't started from where we started. However, going back to confidence, I'm not worried about Gateway 2 so much because you'll get it eventually. And actually, the carrying costs of that time of the development isn't that terrible. Here's the question. You spend the 150 million to build it. You've got through Gateway 2, and then you can't occupy it at Gateway 3. Right, because you can't occupy it until they approve it. So it's more a confidence thing. Now, I don't believe that Gateway 3 will be a problem for our schemes because they'll be sort of 3-4 years hence. But if I were an investor looking outside the UK and thinking, we can't get Gateway 2, and if you can't get Gateway 2, are we going to get Gateway 3? That's not a great position to be in. And I'm sure Paul and Scott would, from an investor's point of view, they need confidence. And the building safety regulator debacle, frankly, doesn't breed confidence. So, I'm absolutely 100% behind what Andy Rowe is doing to try and resolve it and try and help out in any way for all of us to get what we all want, which is buildings that are safe to live in and can be proven to be safe. Full stop.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Paul, let's bring you in here then. Maybe you can react to what Mike has just said about certainty, and also I'm interested to know if outside of our own specific UK issues, are geopolitical events impacting the source or the velocity of capital targeting the build to rent market here.
Whoa, okay, that's a lot to unpack. Let's start with fundamentally, I think that the returns that need to compensate for the risk on development are just not there because of the uncertainty, perceived or real risks that Mike talked about. And everybody wants to buy these assets. People are being pushed into the market to do that, but standing stock doesn't have a lot of the. They may suffer from single stairways, or they may not be built to suit because they were built as for sale products. So what does that uncertainty do? I mean, you've got 5,000, I think, something like that, housing starts in London next year in 2025. We're going to come to a grinding halt. And the other problem with that is, most of the BTR that we talk about has been sort of a higher end luxury service model. I mean, coming from the US, I grew up around workforce housing my entire life, multifamily, low or no amenitized product. And that middle market product in the UK really just doesn't exist. It's too expensive. I mean, there's obviously a market for it, but it's too expensive for the actual normal person to rent. So you know, as much as people want to buy the stock, I don't think it's being built. The regulations make it very difficult and uncertain, and the returns aren't there, you know, for people to take that development risk. But you have to build it before you buy it, right? So what are they going to buy? You know, and as a result of that, they're getting pushed into other sort of vertical asset classes like HMOs, you know, which historically those types of institutions would have never considered. But, you know, they have to deploy capital. So where do they put it? Then you've got the J-curve problem. How do you get capital out the door quick enough to do that? And the problem is most developers like myself or others, you know, we run around town trying to raise ticket sizes of 40, 50 million pounds to do a deal. It's too small for the large institutions. It's too big for a single family office. So there's a gray area. We're all pitching into the void because that capital isn't being deployed to build that middle market product. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Mike, let me come to you. This is a really interesting topic, I think, this kind of amenity light and mid-market thing that people are talking about. It's much needed, but it's not happening. What do you think needs to happen for it to be?
I disagree. So, firstly, I hate the term Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3 when related to build to rent. I don't believe it exists. I think what we're looking at is the build to rent sector is not one thing, right? And it effectively, it's almost like the hotel sector. It's got different offers, different products within it. And for example, Moda, and I shouldn't speak for Moda here, but Moda started out originally with some really what I might call 5-star offer, and then also brought in some other offers into their portfolio. Grainger's offer has always been mid-market. Our amenities pretty light. And we've built 30 of these schemes across the country, including places like Derby and Nottingham. People pay 28% of their household income on the rent. And so it works. So I don't agree that there isn't a cohort of build to rent which is amenity light. But amenity zero, absolutely. I mean, we do own some of that because we own legacy PRS blocks. So that what you get then is well managed from a landlord kind of service provider, but it's faceless to some extent. But there is if you look out into what's been built by all the build to rent players, you get a whole range of products. And I would describe ours as amenity light, but not amenity zero. And I agree, I think that's where there was a deliberate reason why Grainger went into that area, and it's proven to be very successful, as in successful for our customers, 98% occupancy, etc. But I do agree with Paul. The need is for value. So you want to provide a value product which people can afford. And right now, as I've alluded to, even our amenity light model is struggling. But the benefit we have is we've got discounted market rent in our schemes with our own in-house RP, and we can ask for grant, and that will help a lot of the schemes in London come forward in the next year.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Scott, do you want to pick up on what Mike said there about Moda broadening its offer to a kind of larger demographic market? What's the kind of progress there and the rationale there?
I mean, we've got the joint venture with Moda on part of our platforms. We don't work with them on all of it, but you know, we were through that joint venture. We were one of the first to bring BTR to the regions, and you know, can't deny the assets are highly amenitized. We've got a running track on the 8th floor in Birmingham. I think that, and I think Michael's got a point. There is the BTR market. There is scope for what people want within the sector, be it amenity known all the way up. But I think it's where it comes down to it's the affordability piece, and at the moment pressure is on renters' affordability. So that amenity, that very high amenity space just can't work in an underwrite at the moment. But then trying to find the middle ground and trying to make it work for an underwrite to build it is even harder with gateway and everything else like that. So you're in this vicious cycle of the product is required, but you can't get any of it to work at the moment. And that's why sort of the stabilized and built assets is where there is a lot of focus on at the moment. And I fully agree with what Paul was saying about investors being pushed into HMO. There is capital that needs to be deployed. A lot of them have tried, pushing it into the debt market, and the debt market at the moment I've never seen it to be so competitive. But you've got 70 banks chasing one refinancing or one new ticket, and then 69 are losing out and having to go to the next one. There has to be a point where that capital almost has to accept the risk in order to get that return, going back to Michael's point. Um, but to do that, then going back to my first point, they need that stability from what the government is saying, what everyone is saying, and what everyone's going around, gateway, building safety, and all of that, to know that this is what they're going into for the next 4 to 5 years. Because unfortunately, our sector, it's a long-term play. This isn't something that we can pivot in 6 months like other sectors. So it's just one of those things that we're just going to have to play each month through, hopefully for next year with people get their confidence back. And at the end of the day, we need to build homes for people within the UK. I mean, that's the fundamental thing we've always got to remember, and we have done to date. And I think the government needs to go and recognize that there is people within the sector. That's what they have done, and that's what they can continue to do.
Yeah, we've seen a real flurry of investment activity in the PBSA sector in the last 6 months or so, Scott. Do you think that's because investors might be diverting cash that they had earmarked for build to rent into student and co-living and other asset classes?
I think if you've got someone who's not in the living sector within the UK, George, it's the PBSA almost is an easier one to get into. It's a bit easier regulated. It's still got gateway and all of that behind it, but the stabilized kit, and to the extent you're in a decent university town, near enough to a decent university that is funded well, you can underwrite those rentals, the rent, and it's easy. It is just easy to underwrite for build to rent. You've got a one hit to get the occupancy in, but your chances of doing that are much higher than build to rent through a cycle. But I think it's going back to the first point of people have capital they're trying to deploy. They may not have wanted to keep going to PBSA, but they can. There's also a wealth of third-party operators within PBSA that they can utilize to the extent they don't have their own platform as well.
Yeah.
But I think, the PBSA market is getting under pressure as well. It's if you look at the supply that's come through the last 3 years, every day you get a different story about international students, whether they are or they're not coming. But it goes back to there's still a sector within the UK that requires PBSA, BTR. There's a demand for all of it. It's just trying to find the right cost of capital to fit into each bucket.
Yeah, absolutely. Back on the subject of amenity, Sarah, the best thing I've ever seen in a build to rent building is the climbing wall at Wembley. I think that's fantastic. I know it's not suitable for every building, but I thought that was really cool. Sarah, sticking with you for a minute, let's talk about the Renters' Rights Act, which comes into effect in May, I believe now. How do you think that is going to affect how you run your business in the future?
This it certainly is going to be an impact. I think on a number of levels, really. I mean, there's a lot in there which is welcome, but there is a lot in the Renters' Rights Act which is drafted with the minority of rogue landlords in mind, and is not drafted for large professional landlords. So there are some unintended consequences. And I suppose examples of that, there are a number. I mean, I think the loss of fixed term is something that we're going to have to focus on our retentions a bit more tightly. I mean, retention is always, that's the main focus. I mean, letting up new shiny buildings, it's kind of vanity how quickly you can do that, but it's actually retentions and how long you get people to stay is a way you sort of show your worth. At the moment, when we're talking about our average lease length, we can talk about tenants with 12, 24, 36-month tenancies, but sort of moving forward, it will come around, but we're going to have to be looking at what the average tenancies are on the basis that at any time people can give their 2 months notice. So actually what that churn's going to look like will be interesting. Obviously something we can work with, but only time will tell how that actually impacts us. And it's quite hard to predict. And then also the cost to go with that is hard to predict. We also have the loss of Section 21, which completely can understand because of the abuse of that process. But at the same time, I don't really feel like we've been given a replacement to help protect landlords for sort of getting rid of problem tenants. I think the fact that every possession is going to be contentious from now on is going to put huge pressures on internal teams for the admin side of what that's going to look like, and also huge pressures on the courts. I mean, at the moment, the court delays for getting a non-contentious possession, it could be anything from 9 to 12 months. I mean, we've even gone to high court sometimes just to get things done quicker because the county courts are just so overwhelmed, and we've experienced loads of errors there as well. So the fact that all possession proceedings are going to be contentious, I think and the court resource, I think um, that's going to be an issue. Then we've got rent review, which is probably one of the hottest topics that people will talk about when they're talking about the Renters' Rights Act. I think it's a matter of when, not if, tenants are going to realise that they can challenge their annual rent increases without any risk whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I think I mean, I don't know how long it's going to take them to realise that, but when you have hundreds of people living in one building and residents all have their WhatsApp groups, obviously try and get some employees on there as well. But they will talk, and the minute someone's got a formula that works for delaying their rent increase, it's going to go round, and next thing we can have hundreds and hundreds of residents on our hands who every time there's a rent review, whether or not they think it's fair, they may as well challenge it because it means they don't have to pay it for could be months. I mean, at the moment, the rent review tribunal, no one uses it. No one uses it. I mean, it's such a rarely used process. And actually, I actually had to struggle to find out how long the current process is by contacting various lawyers in our network to find out how long it can take. And some people are saying it could even take up to sort of 18 weeks to get through that process. So the idea that all of a sudden the process that's not used is all of a sudden could potentially be inundated by people challenging their rent because they can, and it delays how long they're going to pay it. There's no risk. So that could be quite interesting to see how that's going to pan out. And I suppose the impact of that for BTR operators is when we talk about our rent increases and sort of try and map out for our business plans and our budgets, can we really talk about growth over a 12-month period? Because if we're having delays at tribunal, growth is not going to be over 12 months. It could be over 15 or 18, unless we see some, unless we see some changes or some resource in that area. So a couple of things there, which I think will have an impact for the industry and obviously for Quintain as well. I think probably the final one it's worth mentioning is the not being able to accept rent or charge rent up front. So that's going to affect your overseas or your foreign renters coming in, your people with low or no credit history. They're not going to be able to pay rent up front. So that's going to, I suppose, affect their access to rental properties, or they're going to end up having to pay for insurance products. And actually, it's also quite a weird conversation to have with your tenants when you're saying, actually, no, you can't just have a 12-month fixed tenancy and pay for it up front because people do want that. They will come and they will ask for that. But that telling them they can't have it is going to be quite an odd piece from the comms point of view as well. But yeah.
I wouldn't be overly confident that the rent review tribunal is going to have the resources to cope when, as you say, they get 200 cases from one building when a WhatsApp message goes out amongst the, I've got a horrible feeling they're going to be swamped and not have the capacity to deal with it. Mike, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah. So what we're doing is what lawyers are paid to do, and that's not a dig, by the way, Sarah, at all, which is catastrophize about what really could go wrong. And whilst I agree with all of that theory, the reality is, and I think Sarah alludes to it, we don't really know what's going to be the outcome, and we don't know how many customers are going to want to challenge their rent, etc., etc. We don't know how sticky it's going to be. So we we are now in a position where we're going to have to see, because it's coming in. And I think what we'll have to do is react to, if the unintended consequences start to play through, I think we'll have to lobby the government pretty collectively to try and get them to unblock it, because the negative unintended consequences, forget about for the build to rent operators, but for customers, they are there. The people that Sarah's talking about are people that now won't be able to rent. So where do they go? So I think we need to monitor it and collectively need to see what the outcome is, and then lobby hard if indeed some of these unintended consequences come forward. I'm slightly more sanguine about it. I think as long as your rent reviews are in line with what's happening in the economy with wage inflation and CPI, etc. I think the idea that a whole host of people would all put in rent reviews is unlikely. And actually, for Quintain, and actually for the big build-to-rent operators, we have loads of comparable evidence sitting on our doorstep on our platforms. I think this is more of an issue for, again, the mom-and-pop landlords who don't have the infrastructure that we all have and can't demonstrate the comparables as well as we can. They are being put to another level of cost and red tape, which again could end up with pushing them out of the sector.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Scott, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think just sort of echoing Sarah's point is, one of the big things out of the act is just the pressure on the operations. And the team are going to have the ops team, the site team, to the extent the central teams that are supporting them, and just the workload on that element is going to be so much higher. And this is where using technology is going to be a key part of this process to try and make sure that your document is going to be all about documentation in process and making sure you time every single step to the exact. And I agree with Michael. There is points to this that some of it is a bit noise, and we're going to have to see it out. I mean, when the rolling 28 days came into Scotland a number of years ago, we've not seen people sort of stay in for 2 months and leave. The length of tenancies has generally stayed the same. My biggest concern with the rent growth piece is that any tenant can dispute it for no cost. It's simply a form they fill in. So while I agree with Michael that you can have all the evidence and you've dotted your T's and crossed, done everything you have to, the form goes in, you're in an 18-week process that Sarah's talking about, and then you get to the end of the 8 weeks and that tenant has had 4 months of rent that they haven't had the growth that they've had to pay for. It's that retrospective application, which is going to be the hardest thing for people to sort of stomach, especially with no certainty about how long that tribunal process is going to take.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. We've got a question here from Danny K. Actually, he asks, has the government missed a trick by not allowing index-linked rents? And might there be scope in the secondary legislation for this? Would this be attractive to the panel? Does somebody want to pick that one up? No, I'm going to have to.
No, I'm happy to pick it up. We don't want rent controls, right? The rent controls are a terrible idea. And CPI +1 didn't look very good about 2 years ago. And in fact, the RPs only raised their rent 7%, right? Because, the CPI was 12. So I'm not a big fan of rent control or rent capping of any type. So I don't think it's a trick that's been missed, as it were. But the loss of the fixed term tenancy is annoying. But again, much like Scott says, I'm not sure we'll see a huge amount of people leaving, taking a tenancy for 2 months, effectively signing up and then leaving 2 months later, serving notice on the second day. So again, I don't know though, and we will see what the impact of it is over the next 2 or 3 years. No, but fundamentally, I'm not a big fan of rent control at all, or rent capping. I think it has massive implications to investors and supply coming forward, as we saw in Scotland and in Ireland, in fact.
I think people appreciate good service, and I think most build-to-rent operators do offer a good service. Couple that with the fact that moving is a massive ball ache. I don't think you're hopefully going to have too much churn, but obviously we'll wait and see. Let's talk a bit about the single-family rental market, because that is a bright spot. There's loads going on there. It's really picking up traction. There's been a lot of investment there. Paul, maybe I can come to you first on this one. Do you think the single family rental market here in the UK is an evolution of build to rent, or would you look at it as a sort of fundamentally separate asset class?
Well, I see it as a fundamentally different asset class. It's got different tenant demands, different locations. It's got a very different delivery route, and very different to operate. So, I think very simply put, for me, it's a different asset class. Yeah.
Is it something that you're looking to get involved with, or are you?
No, we're not home builders, and we don't, we haven't funded home builders in that respect. So we're focusing more on what would be a traditional multifamily apartment type complex, which is kind of low or no amenity. Because I think, given the income levels of the people in the market, I think that's where they have to be. I just want to go back to one point on I think Michael made on, and there was a lot of uncertainty in the previous conversation, and these, whether it's rental caps or whether it's the new regulations that have just come out, how do you model that for the future? I mean, the problem is, we all base our returns on rental growth, and if you're a tenant and you can challenge your rents, why wouldn't you do that? What it costs you nothing. Why wouldn't you do that? So I kind of disagree with maybe what someone had said earlier. I think it's a huge friction point for institutional investors. I mean, they'll get around it, but if you're a tenant and you can challenge it, why wouldn't you do that? Because it costs you nothing. And all that does for the institution is increase their costs. So if you've got lots of lawyers and people pushing papers, and even with technology and the things that are on hand, I think the cost of operating that asset just increases significantly, which means your returns have to go higher in order to compensate for that. So I think it's a real problem. But going back to your first question, sorry to divert, I see it as a separate asset class.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Scott, let's come to you on that. You are involved in single family rental. How does the kind of investment case for that compare with urban multifamily?
Yeah, I think I agree with Paul. It is a different asset class. It's the underwrite, in terms of even the development, and then sort of your leasing and retention strategy, because these are generally families or mom and dads with families to come who want stability. A lot of it is those developments are focused where there's infrastructure in place, so local good schools, hospitals, those type of things. So it is a play which actually creates a bit more stability for certain investors. In the current market, house builders are battling with their build to sell product. There isn't the international investors coming through, disposable income for people to buy houses, isn't there? So we've created a partnership with Miller on one of a joint venture in Bedford, but there's a number of house builders who have opportunities like that. They can bring in their product. And ultimately, it's another avenue to support the housing crisis we have within the UK. And you're then getting not just the one bedrooms, you're getting the 3, 4, 5 bedroom houses and actually supporting it, and then creating a product that is service, not necessarily amenitized. I mean, you can have that, but it is definitely an asset class which I feel is going to gain some traction. It doesn't have gateway because you're generally below 18 meters as well, so you come out of that process. So it has its advantages.
Yeah. Scott, do you think that the kind of current model where the house builders are the kind of delivery channel and then investors buy chunks off them at a time as they're completed, do you think that will stay the norm, or do you think we will see more bespoke rental family homes built, specifically by the people who are going to operate them and retain them?
Yeah, I think it's the latter, George, to be honest with you. If you build a house to sell, your general provision of the sort of the layout and also sometimes the fit out is very different to build to rent. Hospitals, it's built to sell, so it looks shiny as a show home, and then they don't need to worry about if the oven breaks, or laminate versus granite tops in the kitchen is always the key thing we look at. So for an investor to actually get in early and get their product fit for purpose, you can also have, we've had a view and an influence on the density of the houses, layouts, and those type of things, and assisting house builders through the planning process. So there's definitely a piece where if you, rather than sort of trying to reposition the asset afterwards, getting at the beginning to support it is something that we've seen and that we did with Eddington and we're looking to do in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Mike.
Yeah, so we have some single family housing which we built on our 2 schemes in Hampshire. Paul and I are going to get on famously because I totally agree with him. It's a different asset class. I like to describe it as institutional PRS because it's a different product to urban build to rent, multifamily as you might call it in the States. So, but if you just look at it, why is it so popular? It doesn't have Gateway 2. It's C3 use without any covenants. It's liquid, so you can buy 100 and you can sell 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, which you can't do with urban. So, from a certainty point of view, it's much more certain, and that's what I think it attracts institutional capital into it, compared to what this country doesn't understand and desperately needs to, is that when you deal with urban schemes of medium to high density, they are complex and risky. When you're building houses in suburban locations, they are nowhere near as expensive or risky to build. And of course, what this country desperately needs is urban regeneration. Yet the institutional capital is heading towards suburban because it's lower risky, better return, more liquid. So, yeah, I agree with Paul, and I can see exactly why. But by the way, institutional capital doesn't have a desperate need to get up in the morning and invest in urban build to rent. Right? It invests in return for risk. And if housing is good, that's great. They'll do it, or they'll just go to another country, or they'll do another asset class, or they might buy bonds or stocks. The urban build to rent, which is really what we're talking about here, is right now not as attractive as single family housing.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Right, we've got some questions from the audience here. I'm going to ask the first one to Sarah. Do you have any comments or thoughts on the rising cost of operational regulation, i.e. increased property licensing costs, increased fire safety regulatory costs, and how this is impacting viability and investors' expectations of NOI?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's something that is all over our sort of budgets and forecasts, and I think as we focus in on NOI, it's definitely a pressure point. Yeah, I don't know if there's much more I can say on it than that.
Okay.
George, can I make the point that it's all that investors look at is the net income from the asset allied to its growth potential, and that's forget about location, but that's key. And it amazes me that people think you can layer on additional operational cost and not impact property values.
Yeah. The next one, Mike, I'm going to point to you because I think you already have a foot in this camp. But the question is there an appetite among the speakers to go into socially rented accommodation? You do have some.
Oh gosh, right. I'll keep this really quick because I've talked enough. There are for-profit RPs that do social rent homes. My personal opinion is that social rent customers, they're there to be given subsidised housing so they can thrive, but by their very nature, they're more vulnerable financially. And my personal opinion is that social rent is where the RP housing association sector plays best. They should be the best custodian of it. That isn't to say for-profit RPs would do badly at it. It's just I think they have an ecosystem in RPs and housing associations that goes beyond simple the contractual arrangement of shelter and all the rest of it. So there is no problem getting any institutional capital to invest in social rent homes at all. But they'll only invest in the income stream, which we talked about just now. And the income stream, the work we've done recently, If the income stream from a social rent home is really, really low, it's got a 1% return on investment without subsidy. So no investor is going. In fact, RPs and councils shouldn't be investing at that level. So what you need is a massive subsidy, a capital subsidy. If that capital subsidy is there, I can guarantee you institutional investors would be very happy to have an FPRP to invest in that income stream. What is not talked about is the fact that social rent homes lose significant amounts of money, typically worth £100,000 on the balance sheet, costs about £350,000 to build the flat or £250,000 to build the house. That deficit, £250,000 to £150,000, is subsidy. No private investor will ever deal with that gap, because that's the viability gap. They will only ever invest in an income stream that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Sarah, at Wembley, presumably you contribute Section 106 payments to off-site affordable housing provision. Is that how it works, or is there any within the development?
There is within the development, but we will sell those off to registered providers. And we've looked at it in the past, but it is just such a different product from an operational point of view. And we would have to, it would be quite a significant sort of a separate setup to what we've got for the private, for the BTR. So it's not something that we've been prepared to do, but we have looked at it, and it's just such, from an operational side of things, it is completely different beast.
Yeah. Okay. And finally, we've got a point of order here from James Pargeter. James says, in the event that the sector needs to lobby collectively, whether on Renters' Rights Act challenge, court resources, or otherwise, a small plea, can we ensure that any evidence of issues is primarily presented as a problem for renters rather than a problem for our businesses and returns? It should arrive at the same result, but it's politically more likely to succeed. Mike, you're nodding your head there. Do you want to comment briefly, and then we're going to have to wrap up?
I totally agree. And we kind of alluded to it early. Some of the impacts of this legislation will work against tenants and customers. They won't be able to access. And we will see that play out, I'm afraid, over the next wee while. But I agree. They're our customers, these people. And if we can frame the problem in how it affects them, it's smarter.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that hour's flown by. We haven't got through our full agenda here, and I didn't think we would, but there's an awful lot to discuss. It's been a great conversation. Thanks, guys. We're going to show a few slides quickly, and then we'll leave the session open for a couple of minutes so you can take some notes from all the good stuff in the chat. The next webinar in this series is taking place on the 12th of December, and it is our trends for 2026 across the living sector. A quick sneak peek. One of them will be institutional investment into HMOs. The link to sign up for that is in the chat. If you'd like to work with us at Urban Living News, whether at our in-person events or online, do get in touch with my colleague Sam, whose details you can see on the screen and also in the chat. And finally, thanks everybody for watching. Thank you to Mike, to Paul, to Sarah, and to Scott for their fantastic contributions. Thanks to you for giving up your time to listen. I hope you found it useful, and have a great weekend. Hopefully see you on the Trends webinar in a couple of weeks. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
At IHM, we believe in the power of connection. We exist to inspire, to inform, and to unite decision makers who are shaping the future of hospitality and real estate. Our why is simple. We believe this industry thrives when people and ideas come together. And we're here to make that happen. So how do we do it? We publish 4 leading multimedia brands, each a trusted voice in its sector. We blend intelligent content, curated events, and a strong community into everything we do, making it easy, accessible, and genuinely useful. From online engagement to face-to-face connection, We're known for being insightful, collaborative, and refreshingly human. We host world-class events, panel discussions, podcasts, award ceremonies, and webinars designed to spark ideas, drive conversation, and create impact. With over 62,000 monthly web visitors, 55,000 email subscribers, and 69,000 social media connections. Our reach is deep and our community is active. We're partnered with the biggest names in hospitality, and we'd love to connect with you. So whether you're looking to grow your visibility, meet the right people, or understand where the market's heading, read, watch, listen, and me. Do it all with IHM.